The oak-paneled House Oversight Committee room buzzed with the usual pre-hearing energy, a palpable hum of anticipation that filled the air like the low drone of a beehive ready to stir, where congressional staffers shuffled stacks of papers with hurried efficiency, their fingers flipping through documents that held the weight of policy debates and political futures, while journalists adjusted their equipment with the precision of technicians preparing for a live broadcast, ensuring microphones were positioned just right to capture every nuance of testimony and every slip of the tongue that could become tomorrow's headline, and committee members settled into their assigned seats along the raised dais, a platform that elevated them both literally and figuratively above the proceedings, symbolizing the hierarchy of power in this hallowed space of American governance. Chairman James Comer, the Republican from Kentucky's 1st District, organized his notes with methodical precision, his hands moving deliberately as if each page turn was a calculated step in a chess game he had played many times before. Known throughout the halls of Congress for his direct questioning style that cut through obfuscation like a sharp blade, and his firm committee management that maintained order even in the most heated exchanges, Comer had earned respect even from political opponents for his thorough preparation that left no stone unturned and his procedural fairness that ensured every voice, regardless of party affiliation, had its moment to be heard, a rarity in an era where partisanship often overshadowed civility. At the witness table sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, representing Texas's 30th District with a presence that commanded attention, as both a member of Congress and a former civil rights attorney with extensive experience in election law that spanned countless courtrooms and case files. She had been invited to provide expert testimony on election administration reform, her background making her a bridge between the theoretical debates of lawmakers and the practical realities faced by voters on the ground. The hearing room quieted as Chairman Comer gave the session to order, his gavel striking with authority that echoed off the wood-paneled walls. After brief introductory remarks that set the tone for what was expected to be a routine exploration of contentious issues, he nodded toward Congresswoman Crockett with a gesture that was polite yet expectant, saying, "Congresswoman Crockett, you've been invited today because of your unique perspective as both a legislator and a practicing attorney with election law experience. You have 5 minutes for your opening statement." His words hanging in the air as all eyes turned to her, Crockett began her testimony with a calm, measured tone that immediately disarmed the room's underlying tension, rather than the partisan framing many had expected from a Democrat in a Republican-led committee. She focused on specific cases she had encountered as an attorney, instances where well-intentioned election procedures had created unintended barriers for eligible voters across diverse communities, painting vivid pictures of individuals whose right to participate in democracy had been hindered not by malice, but by bureaucratic oversights. As she spoke, something unexpected happened, a shift so subtle yet profound that it would later be recounted in whispers among staffers and journalists alike. Chairman Comer, who typically reviewed documents during testimony to cross-reference facts and prepare follow-ups, set aside his papers entirely with a deliberate motion. He removed his reading glasses, leaning forward slightly in his chair, and focused his complete attention on Crockett's presentation, his eyes fixed on her as if absorbing every word, every detail, every implication. The shift was subtle but unmistakable, a departure from the norm that sent ripples through the room. Committee members on both sides of the aisle noticed, exchanging surprised glances that spoke volumes without a word being uttered, their eyebrows raised in silent acknowledgement of the unusual engagement. A veteran correspondent from C-SPAN later commented that in 15 years of covering congressional hearings, he had never seen such a visible transition from procedural courtesy to genuine engagement, a moment where the mask of formality slipped to reveal authentic interest. When Crockett concluded her testimony, wrapping up her points with the precision of a lawyer accustomed to time limits, the room expected the standard perfunctory "thank you" before moving to questioning, a rote response that would signal the shift to the adversarial phase. Instead, Chairman Comer's response would create a moment that Capitol Hill would discuss for months to come, a spark of cross-partisan respect that illuminated the possibility of unity and division. If you want to see what happened next in this remarkable exchange that crossed partisan lines and showed how respectful listening can transform even the most divided political spaces. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We bring you the moments of genuine statesmanship that rarely make headlines, but remind us of what American democracy can be at its best. Those fleeting instances, where humanity triumphs over ideology and collaboration emerges from the ashes of conflict. The House Oversight Committee had convened that Tuesday morning for what was officially titled Hearing on Election Administration Standards and Best Practices, a bland label that masked the fiery undercurrents of debate. Behind this neutral title lay one of the most contentious issues in American politics: how elections are conducted and who gets to participate, a topic that touched on the very foundations of the republic, stirring passions about fairness, integrity, and access. Chairman James Comer had served in Congress since 2017, following experience as Kentucky's Commissioner of Agriculture and service in the Kentucky House of Representatives, with a background in farming and business before entering politics. Experiences that grounded him in the real-world concerns of everyday Americans. Comer brought practical results-oriented thinking to his chairmanship, approaching issues with the mindset of a problem solver rather than an ideologue, while firmly conservative in his policy positions, advocating for limited government and traditional values. Comer had developed a reputation for procedural fairness in committee management, a trait that set him apart in a body often criticized for its divisiveness. Unlike some committee chairs who used their position primarily for partisan advantage, wielding the gavel as a weapon to silence dissent or amplify allies, Comer insisted on allowing all members their allotted time and treating witnesses with professional courtesy regardless of political affiliation, fostering an environment where ideas could be debated on merit. The committee's job is oversight, not overreach, he had stated in his opening remarks upon assuming the chairmanship, a mantra that guided his leadership. We can disagree on policy while agreeing on process, a simple yet profound philosophy that emphasized the importance of rules in maintaining democratic discourse. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had arrived in Washington through a different path, one paved with legal battles and advocacy for the marginalized. Before her election to Congress, she had built a successful career as a civil rights attorney in Texas, handling numerous voting rights cases that exposed the flaws in the system. This direct experience with election law had given her insights that few legislators possessed, a hands-on understanding of how laws translated into lived experiences. She had seen firsthand how administrative decisions affected real voters on the ground, from the elderly struggling with new ID requirements to young people navigating registration hurdles, her work highlighting the human cost of policy failures. Despite being a freshman representative, relatively new to the intricacies of Capitol Hill maneuvering, Crockett had quickly established herself as a thoughtful voice on legal matters, her arguments grounded in constitutional principles and empirical evidence. Even colleagues who disagreed with her policy positions acknowledged her detailed knowledge of constitutional law and procedural questions, respecting her ability to dissect complex issues with clarity and conviction. The hearing had been scheduled against a complex political backdrop, one marked by division and distrust. Several states had recently enacted significant changes to their election procedures, from voter ID laws to mail-in ballot restrictions, creating a patchwork of different standards across the country that confused administrators and voters alike. Both parties recognized the need for more consistent practices, acknowledging that the current system was fragmented and inefficient, but disagreed sharply on what those standards should prioritize, with Republicans advocating for measures to prevent fraud and Democrats pushing for expansions to ensure participation. Republican members generally emphasized verification requirements and local control, believing that states should have autonomy to tailor rules to their needs, while Democratic members focused on access and uniformity, arguing for federal oversight to protect minority rights. These different priorities had stalled previous attempts at bipartisan legislation, turning potential compromises into battlegrounds, leading many observers to view the day's hearing as merely ceremonial, a chance for both sides to restate familiar positions rather than find common ground. A ritualistic display of entrenched views. The witness list reflected this expected division, a lineup designed to balance perspectives but often reinforcing divides. Election officials from both Republican and Democratic administrations would testify, bringing tales from red and blue states, along with academic experts aligned with each party's general approach. Scholars whose research conveniently supported preconceived notions. Congresswoman Crockett had been added to the witness list because of her unique dual perspective as both a legislator and a practicing attorney with direct election law experience. Her inclusion a nod to the value of practical expertise in a sea of theoretical debate. Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone from a different political perspective really listened to your viewpoint, truly absorbing your words without immediate rebuttal or dismissal? What made that possible? Perhaps it was the sincerity in their eyes, or the absence of agenda. Share your experiences in the comments. Understanding how genuine dialogue happens across differences helps us all contribute to a healthier democracy, fostering connections that transcend ideology. The hearing room that morning reflected the standard choreography of Washington politics, a well-rehearsed dance of predictability. On the Republican side of the dais, members had prepared questions highlighting security concerns and state autonomy, ready to probe for vulnerabilities in the system that could be exploited. On the Democratic side, members had ready questions about access barriers and standardization, poised to highlight disparities that disenfranchised vulnerable groups, remained intact while eligible voters weren't incorrectly turned away. She explained, providing a blueprint for replication. As Crockett continued, weaving her narrative with facts and anecdotes, Chairman Comer's attentive posture became increasingly noticeable, his body language shifting from detached observer to engaged listener. Instead of the polite but distant expression committee chairs typically maintain during opposition testimony to preserve impartiality, he was listening with evident engagement, his head tilting slightly as he processed her points. He nodded slightly at several points, particularly when Crockett described how standardized training for poll workers had reduced both access problems and security concerns in several Texas counties, a solution that resonated with his own district's issues. Committee members on both sides noticed this shift, a break from the norm that sparked curiosity. The Democratic ranking member glanced at his staff with raised eyebrows, a silent query of, "Did you see that?" A junior Republican member looked momentarily confused by her chairman's unexpected engagement with testimony they had anticipated would be routinely partisan, perhaps expecting a more dismissive stance. Crockett concluded by addressing the committee's central concern directly, cutting to the heart of the debate. The fundamental question isn't whether we should prioritize access or security. Both are essential to functional democracy. The question is how we implement systems that achieve both goals simultaneously through clear standards, consistent training, and procedures designed for real-world conditions. She stated, her words a call for unity in action. She finished precisely at the 5-minute mark, a courtesy committee chairs always appreciate, demonstrating respect for the process. "Thank you for your attention. I welcome your questions," she added, opening the floor. The standard procedure would have been for Chairman Comer to offer a brief polite thank you before recognizing committee members for questioning and alternating party order, maintaining the rhythm of the hearing. Instead, he leaned toward his microphone with an expression of genuine consideration, his face reflecting thoughtfulness rather than routine. "Congresswoman Crockett, thank you for that testimony. I particularly appreciate your focus on specific practical examples rather than abstract principles," he said, his voice carrying a note of sincerity that surprised many. "Before we move to committee questions, I'd like to ask you to elaborate on something you mentioned. This direct engagement from the chair was itself unusual, a deviation that heightened the room's attention. But what followed was even more remarkable. You described how Harrison County resolved ID verification issues through better training and clear guidelines without changing the underlying security requirements. Could you explain more about how that balanced approach worked in practice?" The question wasn't challenging or adversarial, laced with hostility. It reflected genuine interest in a potential solution that might address concerns from both partisan perspectives. A rare olive branch in a divided arena. Crockett, momentarily surprised by this unexpected engagement that broke the mold, quickly recovered with the poise of a seasoned litigator. "Certainly, Mr. Chairman. The key insight in Harrison County was recognizing that the problem wasn't the verification requirement itself, but the inconsistent implementation," she replied, delving deeper. She described how the county had developed a clear visual guide for poll workers, showing all acceptable forms of identification with pictures and descriptions to eliminate ambiguity. They had also implemented a simple escalation procedure when questions arose, ensuring that voters weren't turned away unnecessarily while maintaining security protocols to prevent fraud. The result was a 97% reduction in provisional ballots due to ID issues, while actually strengthening security through more consistent verification. Both election integrity and voter access improved simultaneously, she concluded, her data-driven response underscoring the efficacy. Rather than moving on to the next phase, Chairman Comer asked a follow-up question about training procedures and costs, probing for details that could inform policy. This spontaneous dialogue continued for several minutes, with Comer asking increasingly specific questions about implementation details, resource requirements, and potential federal support roles, turning the hearing into a collaborative workshop. The committee room remained unusually quiet during this exchange, the typical undercurrent of whispers and note-passing absent as all focused on the unfolding conversation. The partisan script had been abandoned, replaced by something rarely seen in congressional hearings, genuine problem-solving dialogue across party lines. A breath of fresh air in stale air. After several minutes of this unexpected exchange that captivated the audience, Ranking Member Connolly interjected with a good-natured comment, his tone light to ease any tension. Mr. Chairman, I'm delighted to see this productive discussion, but I believe you're using democratic questioning time, he said. A ripple of friendly laughter broke the tension in the room, humanizing the proceedings. Chairman Comer smiled and nodded, acknowledging the point with grace. The ranking member is correct, and I appreciate his patience. I got caught up in what I found to be exceptionally informative testimony, he replied, turning back to Crockett with evident sincerity. Congresswoman, thank you for your practical approach to these issues. This is precisely the kind of specific solution-oriented information that helps us move beyond talking points. His words a public endorsement that carried weight. This statement from a Republican chairman to a Democratic witness on a topic as contentious as election administration caused a visible reaction throughout the hearing room. Journalists looked up from their notebooks with widened eyes. Staff members exchanged glances of astonishment. Committee members from both parties appeared genuinely surprised, their expressions a mix of intrigue and approval. What followed was equally unexpected, a further departure from norm. Instead of proceeding with the standard 5-minute rounds of alternating partisan questioning typically used for scoring political points rather than gathering information, Chairman Comer suggested a different approach, his voice steady as he proposed a pivot. Given the practical nature of Congresswoman Crockett's testimony, I'd like to suggest we use our questioning time to explore specific implementation solutions rather than debate abstract principles. Perhaps members could focus on how their constituents' specific concerns might be addressed through the kind of balanced approaches the Congresswoman has described. This suggestion, gently redirecting the committee toward problem-solving rather than partisan positioning, was a departure from standard practice that reflected genuine respect for the substance of Crockett's testimony, elevating the hearing. The questioning that followed maintained this unexpectedly constructive tone, a harmonious flow that surprised even the most cynical observers. Republican members asked about security assurances within streamlined processes, seeking to ensure safeguards were robust. Democratic members inquired about implementation costs and federal support roles, exploring feasibility. Rather than the typical partisan talking points that echoed like broken records, the discussion centered on practical solutions that might work across diverse communities, from urban centers to rural outposts. Throughout this exchange, Chairman Comer's respectful engagement set the tone, a leadership example that others followed. He repeatedly referenced specific points from Crockett's testimony, demonstrating that he had not merely heard, but actively listened to her presentation, internalizing the details. When partisan framing occasionally emerged from committee members, slipping into old habits, he gently redirected the discussion toward practical implementation questions, steering the ship back to productive waters. This atmosphere of respectful problem-solving culminated in an exchange that would later be described as a masterclass in congressional dialogue by political observers, a textbook example of how to conduct oversight with integrity. As the committee's questioning continued, something remarkable happened. A transformation that unfolded gradually but unmistakably. The performative aspects of typical hearings gradually fell away. the grandstanding and sound bites giving way to substance, replaced by genuine engagement with the substantive issues at hand. Members from both parties began referencing specific examples from their own districts, asking how the balanced approaches Crockett had described might apply to their constituents' experiences, turning the hearing into a shared learning session. After nearly an hour of this unusually productive discussion that flew by in the intensity of the moment, Chairman Comer again addressed Congresswoman Crockett directly, his tone appreciative. "Congresswoman, I want to thank you for testimony that has been genuinely helpful to this committee's work. You've presented practical approaches that address concerns from multiple perspectives, which is unfortunately rare in our discussions of election administration," he said, building to a climax. He continued with a statement that stunned the hearing room into complete silence, the air thick with anticipation. "I entered this hearing with certain preconceptions about the trade-offs between security and access in election administration. Your testimony, specifically your concrete examples of implementations that strengthen both simultaneously, has genuinely caused me to reconsider some of those assumptions." For a committee chairman to publicly acknowledge that testimony had changed his thinking, particularly on such a politically charged topic, was virtually unprecedented in recent congressional history, a vulnerability that humanized him. The chamber remained completely silent as Comer continued. "While I maintain my commitment to election integrity and security, I believe there's wisdom in your approach of focusing on implementation details rather than abstract principles. The practical solutions you've described deserve serious consideration from all of us who care about improving our election systems." His words a bridge across the divide. The impact of this statement rippled through the hearing room like a wave, touching every corner. A veteran committee staffer later told reporters that in 17 years of working in Congress, she had never witnessed such a genuine moment of cross-partisan respect on a topic this politically charged, a beacon in dark times. What made the moment particularly powerful was that neither Comer nor Crockett had abandoned their core principles. No compromises on fundamental beliefs. Comer remained committed to security and verification standards, his conservative roots intact. Crockett maintained her focus on removing unnecessary barriers to voting, her advocacy unwavering. But both had demonstrated something increasingly rare in political discourse, the ability to recognize legitimate concerns across partisan divisions and seek solutions that addressed multiple priorities simultaneously. A model of mature leadership. Ranking Member Connolly, the senior Democrat on the committee, recognized the significance of the moment with timeliness. "Mr. Chairman, if you'll indulge me briefly, I want to acknowledge what we've just witnessed. This is how congressional oversight is supposed to work. Learning from witnesses with relevant expertise and allowing that information to inform our thinking regardless of partisan affiliations," he said, his voice carrying approval. Chairman Comer nodded in agreement, a gesture of unity. "The ranking member is exactly right. Our job is not to perform for cameras, but to gather information that helps us craft better policy. Today's testimony has been exceptionally valuable in that regard," he replied, reinforcing the sentiment. As the hearing continued, several committee members followed Comer's lead, acknowledging specific aspects of Crockett's testimony that had provided new perspectives on election administration challenges, a cascade of positive feedback. A Republican representative from Ohio noted that the training protocols Crockett described could address concerns his office had heard from rural election officials, seeing applicability in his state. A Democratic representative from Arizona acknowledged that the security measures incorporated into Crockett's balanced approach would help build voter confidence while maintaining accessibility, finding common ground. The hearing concluded with something rarely seen in congressional proceedings, a sense of actual progress on a divisive issue, an optimistic energy that lingered, rather than the typical outcome of members simply restating entrenched positions like parrots. The discussion had identified specific areas where bipartisan approaches might be possible, laying groundwork for future action. In his closing remarks, Chairman Comer again demonstrated the unexpected respect that had characterized the entire proceeding. His words a fitting capstone. "Congresswoman Crockett, I want to thank you again for testimony that was genuinely informative rather than merely persuasive. You've given this committee practical approaches that might help us move beyond the false choice between access and security," he said, his tone earnest. He continued with a comment that captured the essence of the unexpected respect he had shown throughout the hearing. While we may still have different priorities and perspectives, your focus on implementation rather than ideology has been refreshingly productive. This committee will be incorporating several of your specific recommendations into our ongoing work, a commitment that signaled real impact. As the hearing adjourned with the strike of the gavel, the usual rapid exodus from the committee room didn't occur. Instead, members from both parties lingered, continuing discussions that had begun during the formal proceedings, informal chats that extended the dialogue. Several approached Congresswoman Crockett, directly asking follow-up questions about implementations in their specific districts, seeking tailored advice. Most notably, Chairman Comer stepped down from the dais and approached Crockett personally, a gesture of respect rarely seen across party lines, particularly on such a politically charged topic, his dissent symbolizing a leveling of the playing field. Their brief conversation, though not captured by microphones to preserve privacy, was described by those nearby as a genuine exchange about potential next steps for election administration improvements, a forward-looking discussion, as attendees finally began filing out of the committee room. The unusual nature of what they had witnessed was the primary topic of conversation, animated whispers filling the hallways. A senior congressional correspondent was overheard telling a colleague, "I've covered hundreds of these hearings, and I've never seen anything like what just happened. Actual listening, actual respect across party lines on election issues of all topics." Her voice laced with wonder. What none of them yet realized was how this unexpected moment of respectful engagement would reshape the broader conversation about election administration in the weeks and months ahead, a ripple effect that extended far beyond the room. By that evening, clips of Chairman Comer's respectful engagement with Congresswoman Crockett's testimony had begun circulating on social media and news programs, going viral in political circles. Political analysts expressed surprise at the substantive nature of the exchange on such a traditionally divisive topic, praising it as an anomaly. What we witnessed today wasn't just unusual, it was almost unrecognizable in our current political climate, noted a veteran political correspondent on Evening News. A Republican chairman not only listening carefully to a Democratic witness, but publicly acknowledging the value of her perspective on election administration, one of our most politically charged topics. The unexpected moment of cross-partisan respect generated attention precisely because it contrasted so sharply with the combative norm of congressional hearings, a breath of civility in a storm of rancor. Several news outlets ran variations of the headline, "Unexpected Respect, Comer and Crockett Model Productive Dialogue on Election Reform," capturing the essence. What made the coverage particularly notable was its focus on the substance of the exchange rather than just the surprising civility. News analyses highlighted the specific implementation approaches Crockett had presented and Comer's substantive engagement with those proposals, delving into the policy implications. The following morning, Chairman Comer appeared on a national news program, where the host immediately asked about his unusually respectful engagement with Congresswoman Crockett's testimony, probing for insight. "Look, my job as committee chairman isn't to score political points. It's to gather information that helps us develop better policy," Comer explained, his demeanor straightforward. Congresswoman Crockett presented exactly the kind of specific practical information we needed. She focused on implementations that address both security and access concerns simultaneously, that deserved serious engagement regardless of partisan differences. When pressed about whether this signaled a shift in his approach to election issues, Comer was characteristically direct. "My priorities haven't changed. I still believe strongly in election integrity and security." But Congresswoman Crockett showed how those priorities can be achieved while also addressing legitimate concerns about access. That's the kind of balanced approach that deserves respect and consideration. Congresswoman Crockett, appearing on a different program that same day, demonstrated similar grace. Her response is measured. When asked about the unusual respect she had received from Chairman Comer, she focused on substance rather than surprise. What Chairman Comer demonstrated is what we need more of in Congress, the willingness to engage with practical solutions rather than just ideological positions, she noted. "I still have different priorities in some areas, but I deeply respect his willingness to consider approaches that address multiple concerns simultaneously." Beyond media coverage that amplified the moment, The hearing had more substantive impacts, ripple effects that translated into action. 3 days later, Chairman Comer and Ranking Member Connolly jointly announced the formation of a bipartisan working group on election administration standards, a collaborative effort that surprised many. The group would focus specifically on developing best practices for implementation that maintain security while ensuring access for all eligible voters, a direct outgrowth of the hearing. Most surprisingly, they announced that Congresswoman Crockett had been invited to serve as a technical advisor to the working group, an unusual role for a member of Congress from the opposite party of the committee. Chairman, highlighting her expertise. The announcement noted her unique expertise in both the legal and practical aspects of election administration, a formal recognition. This concrete step toward bipartisan collaboration on a traditionally divisive issue attracted attention from election officials across the country, drawing praise. Several state election directors from both Republican and Democratic administrations expressed support for the working group's practical implementation-focused approach, seeing potential for national improvement. Over the following months, the working group held a series of roundtable discussions with election administrators from diverse jurisdictions. Forums that fostered exchange. These conversations focused on specific implementation challenges and practical solutions rather than abstract principles, maintaining the approach that had characterized the original hearing. Building on its momentum, 6 months after the hearing, the working group released a report titled Election Administration Best Practices, Balancing Security and Access, a comprehensive document that offered guidance. The document included specific recommendations for poll worker training, identification verification protocols, polling place management, and early voting procedures, all designed to maintain security while removing unnecessary barriers to participation. Practical tools for reform. What made the report particularly significant was its unanimous endorsement by working group members from both parties, a consensus rare in polarized times. Rather than producing a majority report with a minority dissent, the typical outcome of such efforts where disagreements lead to splits, the group had developed recommendations that genuinely addressed concerns from multiple perspectives, a testament to collaborative spirit. At the press conference announcing the report, Chairman Comer specifically acknowledged Congresswoman Crockett's contribution, giving credit where due. The balanced approach reflected in these recommendations builds directly on the practical insights Congresswoman Crockett shared in her testimony. Her focus on implementation, rather than ideology, helped us develop solutions that work for diverse communities while maintaining essential security standards, he said, his praise public. Beyond the specific policy outcome that influenced state practices, the respectful exchange between Comer and Crockett had broader impacts on political discourse about election administration. Shifting narratives, political commentators began citing it as an example of how substantive dialogue across partisan lines might be possible, even on deeply divisive issues, a case study in possibility. Several universities and policy institutes incorporated video of the exchange into training materials for government officials and aspiring public servants, educational tools. One leading public policy program developed a case study titled The Comer-Crockett Exchange, creating space for substantive dialogue in polarized contexts, analyzing its dynamics. Perhaps most significantly, the exchange provided a template for how committee hearings might function more productively. Inspiring changes. Several committee chairs in both the House and Senate began explicitly encouraging witnesses to focus on practical implementations rather than partisan framing, adopting the model. Some even referenced the Comer-Crockett Exchange when setting expectations for testimony, using it as a benchmark. 1 year after the hearing, a nonpartisan civic organization presented Chairman Comer and Congresswoman Crockett with its annual Bridge Builder Award, recognizing their demonstration that respectful substantive dialogue across partisan differences remains possible even on our most divisive political topics, an honor that celebrated their legacy. In his acceptance remarks, Chairman Comer reflected on what had made the exchange possible, his words introspective. It wasn't about either of us abandoning our principles. It was about recognizing that different perspectives, when engaged respectfully, can lead to more complete solutions. Congresswoman Crockett didn't try to convince me that security concerns weren't important. She showed how they could be addressed simultaneously with access concerns through thoughtful implementation, he said, highlighting the key. Congresswoman Crockett's remarks similarly emphasized substance over style, her perspective complementary. What made Chairman Comer's response meaningful wasn't just politeness. It was his genuine engagement with practical solutions. Respect isn't just about being nice. It's about taking other perspectives seriously enough to consider how they might inform better approaches, she noted, underscoring depth. For many observers of American politics, the unexpected respect between these two political figures from different parties, regions, and backgrounds represented something more fundamental than a single productive hearing, a symbol of hope. It demonstrated that even in an era of intense polarization where division seems the default, substantive dialogue remains possible when public servants focus on solving real problems rather than scoring political points, a reminder of core values. As one political scientist noted in an analysis of the exchange and its aftermath, what Comer and Crockett modeled wasn't compromise in the sense of each side giving up core values. It was collaboration in the best sense, finding approaches that address legitimate concerns from multiple perspectives simultaneously. That's how democratic governance is supposed to work, efficient and inclusive. The legacy of that unexpected moment of respect continues to influence how many think about political dialogue in America, inspiring new generations. A reminder that listening carefully to different perspectives isn't just civically virtuous, but practically valuable for developing more effective solutions to complex challenges. A lesson in efficacy. If you found this example of respectful engagement across partisan lines refreshing, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more coverage of the moments when our political leaders rise above division to address shared challenges. Content that uplifts. Share this video with friends across the political spectrum as a reminder that substantive dialogue remains possible even on our most divisive issues when we focus on practical solutions rather than partisan positioning. Spreading the message. What other political issues do you think might benefit from this kind of practical implementation-focused approach? Issues like healthcare, immigration, or climate change? Let's discuss in the comments to keep the conversation going.